Sometimes, to experience a truly great story, you have to do things you're not very proud of, like turn down a game's difficulty or activate casual mode. I absolutely adore the Xeno series of JRPGs, with their intricate plots, fascinating characters, and deep philosophical themes. And way back when Xenoblade Chronicles was first released for the Nintendo Wii, I really tried to get through it. But after 45 hours of forcing my way through a game I didn't really enjoy playing, I just stopped. 10 years later, I finally came back to finish what I had started with Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition for the Nintendo Switch. And I can now safely say that Xenoblade is a great story, trapped in a frustrating game. Most of my video essays are full of spoilers. For this video, I'm gonna limit them to things that happen in the first few hours of the game. There's a reason for that, and it has to do with the one central quality that makes Xenoblade Chronicles such an amazing story. But we'll get to that later. Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition is a Nintendo Switch remaster of the original Japanese RPG, which was released in 2010 for the Nintendo Wii. It's the same game, but juiced up with better graphics, a smoother interface, and quality of life improvements. Not all games benefit from a remaster, but Xenoblade needed it more than most JRPGs. Simply put, the Nintendo Wii wasn't built to handle massive open-world areas and realistic environments. The remaster gave the characters a facelift with higher resolution textures, although the animations still look just as rough as before. Something that's held up much better is the enemies you fight, and some of Xenoblade's colossal high-level titans feel really intimidating, even from a distance. But the remaster's best effort is in how it updates what is arguably the most important part of the gameplay. Xenoblade's beautiful open-world areas are now rendered with more depth and color, added sharpness where everything used to be all blurry, and increased draw distance to make the world feel more alive. When it comes to graphics, the Definitive Edition has one thing in common with the original. Neither version is winning any awards. But the remaster goes a long way towards keeping Xenoblade Chronicles relevant for modern audiences for decades to come. Xenoblade is a third-person action RPG set in an epic sci-fi world. You form a party of up to 3 characters, although you only directly control the party leader. There's a total of 7 playable characters that will join you over the course of the game, and outside of a few specific parts of the story, you have full control of which of them to include. In fact, for a game that puts so much focus on the story, Xenoblade goes a bit further than many JRPGs, because even the game's hero, Shulk, can be left on the sidelines if you prefer. And Xenoblade is definitely a game that puts story front and center. But before we get into all of that, we first must talk about what lies at the heart of Xenoblade Chronicles, the fundamental element that forms the backbone of not just the game's story, but its core gameplay as well. Xenoblade is all about the journey the party makes through the game's vast world. The game is divided into distinct areas, and each one presents a vast, complex environment for you to explore. Outdoor areas are filled with deep canyons, towering cliffs, and soaring stone arches. And even the more traditional dungeons do a great job of giving a feeling of scope, with branching paths, looping tunnels, and plenty of side areas. There's enough complexity in the level design to give the illusion of freedom and a sense of exploration, and there's plenty of chances to use the environment to your advantage by climbing walls or leaping across ledges to reach hidden areas, bypass dangerous monsters, or maneuver around your enemies to set up a more favorable angle of attack. One of the early areas has an optional fortress on a cliff that can be approached either through a frontal assault or by sneaking in the back. The game's level design isn't always that creative, and some areas can feel a bit too linear, but when it's good, it's good. Some people call the game an open-world JRPG, but I don't think that's quite right. While you do have a lot of freedom in choosing how to approach each of the game's individual areas, the path between them is entirely fixed. That said, while Xenoblade isn't exactly an open-world game, it is a game about discovery. And one of the best things about making your way through Xenoblade's world is just how gorgeous it can be. Each of the game's different areas is filled with colorful sights and breathtaking vistas, and this effect is made even more immersive by one of the game's most dynamic features. As day turns to night, Xenoblade's landscapes undergo dramatic transformations, creating striking contrasts that are often worth slowing your step to take in. Honestly, Satoral Marsh at night is one of my favorite places to be in all of gaming. The journey is made all the more special by another of the game's greatest merits. Japanese RPGs are famous for their amazing soundtracks, and Xenoblade Chronicles is no exception. Pretty much every area in the game has its own unique music, and most areas even alternate tracks between day and night. And when they don't, the choice seems deliberate, with some of the game's indoor environments giving a timeless feeling where night and day become one. The area themes are immersive and meditative, pulling you deeper into the adventure. My only gripe is that this trance-like state is so frequently interrupted by the battle music. Of course, immersive environments don't do much good if the game doesn't give you a reason to explore them. Even though Xenoblade's critical path skips large chunks of the world, the designers used a bunch of clever techniques to draw you into the unknown. And the simplest way the game rewards exploration is by making sure it pays off. Each new location you find gives a nice bit of experience and art points, so it really pays to travel widely. There's also collectibles to gather, secret areas to find, ether crystals to mine, special conversations to unlock, and plenty of unique monsters to challenge. All of these activities are optional, but can be very rewarding to do. But the game also drives exploration by using the structure of the story. For better or worse, many of the game's main story objectives are built like fetch quests, like being told to collect 4 items from all around Satoral Marsh or activate a pair of ancient devices on opposite ends of the arid sea. A lot of these quests can come off feeling like busy work. It's not a terrible thing, but I do wish they'd been a bit more creative here and there. Any game that has open world aspirations has to solve a pretty big problem. How do you design a world that allows the player to get lost without making the path forward too hard to find? The original version of Xenoblade Chronicles didn't do a great job of striking this balance. Different parts of each area usually ended up looking a lot alike. There aren't a lot of identifiable landmarks to navigate by, and it's hard to tell where you are by sight alone. The Definitive Edition's solution to this problem works, but it's also lazy and kind of boring. One of the features that were added in the Definitive Edition was travel guidance, essentially a helpful GPS system that shows a path from your current location to your chosen destination. It certainly cuts down on time wasted fumbling for the path forward, but it's kind of like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. When all you do is follow a line on the minimap, where's the sense of exploration? And if you're busy watching the minimap, do you even really see the world around you? Travel guidance can be turned off in the game's menu, but even that isn't a perfect solution. The fact of the matter is that some of Xenoblade's areas have such frustrating design, you kinda need the minimap to get you through them without excessive frustration. Travel guidance really helps, I just wish it didn't need to. In its best moments, exploring Xenoblade's vast and beautiful world makes for some pretty memorable experiences, and one of my favorites is the intoxicating taste of freedom you get right around the start of the game. After making your way through the dark and narrow tunnels of the game's first dungeon, you find yourself on a cliff high above Colony 9, surrounded by blue skies and drifting clouds. It's a chance to pull back and appreciate the scope of the journey you just made. But best of all, you now stand perfectly poised to take a leap of faith into the lake far below. It's a great first impression of Xenoblade Chronicles, and it really sets the tone for the rest of the game. But then there are times when the journey is nothing but following the dotted yellow line on your minimap through long winding hallways. Times when exploration feels like a thing of the past, and Xenoblade leans hard into the other big part of the core gameplay. Combat in Xenoblade Chronicles uses a real-time command-based system, but this is not your typical action RPG. Instead, Xenoblade draws a lot of inspiration from an unlikely source, MMOs like World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV. You move your character around the battlefield to dish out auto attacks against the targeted enemy while using powerful special abilities called battle arts, which recharge over time. Each character has a unique set of battle arts that cause damage, inflict status effects, heal your allies, and more. Each character also has a special talent art that charges up over the course of the fight and can be unleashed at just the right time to swing the tide of battle. While you have the support of 2 allies in combat, you only directly control the party leader, and your choice of leader is more than aesthetic. It matters a lot. Each hero has their own unique playstyle. Shulk is all about managing aggro and setting up devastating positional attacks. Sharla wields a long-range gun and comes loaded with healing arts. And Melia, well, I honestly don't know how she works. I hit buttons, pretty colors appear, and the enemies die. The point is, if you're not enjoying combat as Shulk, you've got plenty of chances to find a playstyle that suits you better. Your choice of party leader matters, but it's not the most important decision you have to make. Because another thing the game borrows from MMOs is in how the different characters are designed to fit together. For the most part, Xenoblade's heroes slot into the traditional MMO trinity of tank, healer, and damage dealer. Each character has a defined role, with Shulk being a damage dealer, Rain being a tank, and Sharla being a healer. There are ways to get around these restrictions, but since the game is designed with the expectation that you'll cover all 3 roles when you form your party, you'll have to work so much harder if you don't. For me, this is a problem. I'm someone who really likes to pick my crew based on visual style or simply which characters I enjoy being around, so Xenoblade's role-based setup can feel pretty restrictive, and managing aggro in a single-player game honestly just sucks. Xenoblade's combat system can be pretty hard to grasp. It's not that the system is especially complicated, it's more that the game does a bad job of teaching it. Chain attacks, break combos, spike abilities, visions, tension, skill links, party affinity, burst affinity, these are all things you're expected to learn if you want to master the game's combat. But the way the game tries to teach you is entirely through reading. In the first few hours of the game, you're bombarded with constant textbook tutorials. The explanations are often confusing, and you rarely get a chance to try a thing out before you're thrown into the next tutorial, which I think is a huge mistake. Giving a demonstration and then letting the player try it themselves should be the standard. And even then, there's so much more the game doesn't even try to teach you. I had no idea there's a multiplier in chain attacks that's based on the color of the battle arts you pick. I never figured out what tension did, and I still don't know what gear weight does or what lock-on resistance is. It's not just the combat system itself that can be confusing though. It's just as easy to get confused by what's shown on screen. Xenoblade's battles are chaotic, and the screen quickly fills up with huge monsters, tons of visual effects, and all sorts of information. There's damage numbers, buff and debuff notifications, and meters that track the duration of ongoing effects. It's often hard to tell where enemies and allies are, and in Xenoblade, that's a problem. There's a lot of actions you can take in battle to help your allies out. You can encourage them if they've lost their fighting spirit, help them to their feet if they get toppled, and revive them if they get knocked out. and Shulk even has a special power that lets him warn his allies of future attacks. All of which is really hard to do when you can't even find your allies on the screen. Another real issue is that you often find yourself fighting not just the monsters, but also the game's controls. The biggest problem is what's called the art palette. Each character can assign up to 8 battle arts, in addition to their signature talent art, which in the case of Shulk opens up a new menu with even more arts to pick from. To activate an art, you need to navigate the art palette using the directional buttons. This is a slow process, but the worst part is that you often have to do this while moving your character with a left analog stick, which is super awkward. But there is a feature of the game's combat system that solves all of these problems. A situation where positioning, controls, and even timing no longer matter. Ironically, my favorite part of combat is the one where the real-time action stops and battle becomes something out of a turn-based game. When you initiate a chain attack, the action grinds to a halt, pausing combat to let you select each character's action one by one. It's a really cool system within the system, almost like a minigame where you chain together different attacks to create devastating combos. And honestly, I kinda wish the whole game was like this. Xenoblade's combat system has a lot of great ideas, but it also feels rough, like a first attempt at something new and innovative. At its best, it's a deeply tactical, real-time bonanza that demands a lot from the player. With a proper understanding of the characters' kits and how they interact, how to optimize gear and gems, and mastery of the game's combat mechanics, a skilled player can do things that seem impossible to the casual fan. And there were times when the combat really clicked for me, and I could see why so many people have had so much fun with it. But for someone who wants a casual experience, who doesn't want to dig deep on Reddit and YouTube to master the game's many systems, Xenoblade Chronicles can be confusing, frustrating, and extremely repetitive. And if you're someone like me, who never really got the combat system, you're gonna have a really hard time. That is, if you do it the way the game intended. I don't know why, but I really struggled with Xenoblade Chronicles' combat system. I've been playing JRPGs since the early 90s, and I honestly can't remember a game where I had to grind this much just to get through the story. Years ago, with the original Nintendo Wii version of Xenoblade, I got about halfway through the game before giving up. Despite doing about 100 side quests, hunting down most of the game's super monsters, and grinding levels in every area before moving on, I still struggled at every step along the way. Eventually, I just got sick of it. I still desperately wanted to know how the story would end, but every time I thought about playing the game, it just felt like a chore. I didn't know it at the time, but the great irony is that I actually stopped right before the most tedious, drawn-out, grind-heavy part of the game. I hadn't even seen the worst part. The Definitive Edition is still the same game, but there is one crucial difference. A new feature that solves most of the game's grinding needs. It's not perfect, but it works. At any point during the game, you can go into the menu and activate Casual mode. This difficulty setting halves the damage you take from enemies and doubles the damage you do to them, making combat run a lot faster. But Casual mode also applies several other effects that are much more important. It also makes the party gauge fill up twice as fast, meaning you can revive allies twice as often or trap boss monsters in endless chain attacks. And it also removes the penalties to accuracy and resistance when facing higher level foes, and trivializes some of the game's most annoying mechanics like spike damage. But the best thing about Casual mode is what it does for the game's pacing. In the original Nintendo Wii version, it took me 45 hours to reach the halfway point of the story. With Casual mode activated, I finished the whole game in 35 hours. Casual mode really does make Xenoblade Chronicles a lot more casual, and it honestly saved the game for me. Without it, I would have given up a second time. That said, I think Casual mode went a bit too far. Normal mode was too tedious for me, but casual mode feels almost like cheating. Ordinary battles become trivial, and only a couple of bosses in the game even offered any challenge at all. I really wish they'd done a better job of striking the right balance here. But the upside is that you can switch casual mode on and off at any point in the game, even between fights. Of course, all that time you save by playing on casual mode leaves you a lot more opportunities to engage with the game's optional content, if you feel like it. Xenoblade Chronicles is a great game, or maybe a terrible game, for completionists. There's a whole world to explore, full of places you might have missed the first time around. You can gather ether crystals from mining nodes and refine them into equipable gems at the ether furnace. You can build affinity between characters, set up skill links between party members, and unlock special heart-to-heart conversations. You can fill out the characters' skill trees and max their battle arts, optimize their gear, and customize the way characters look using the game's surprisingly fun appearance system. You can trade your loot for better items with any of the game's NPCs, help rebuild Colony 6, fill out the collectibles board by combing through the game's areas, and hunt down super monsters that will stomp you so hard if you don't come prepared. And if you still can't get enough of Xenoblade's combat system, there's also Time Attack that lets you test your prowess against special challenge fights. There's also a staggering amount of side quests to do, literally hundreds. Most of them are standard fetch quests and monster hunts, but there are a handful of quests that expand on the personal stories of some of the more important side characters, show you new areas of the game, or offer unique rewards. There's a lot of stuff to do in Xenoblade Chronicles, but really, the best part of Xenoblade is right there in the heart of the gameplay experience. Because for all of the complaints I've raised about the game, in the end, they all pale in comparison to the absolute gift that is Xenoblade's story. If there is one crucial part of any story that you have to get right, it's obviously the beach scene. Well, Xenoblade has no beach scene, but it does nail its introduction, which is also very important. When it comes to saving the world, it doesn't get more literal than in Xenoblade Chronicles. The story takes place in a unique world that's set upon the backs of two colossal titans, the Bionis and the Mechonis. In the distant past, these godlike giants fought each other to a bitter stalemate, but they now stand immobilized in an endless ocean, supporting life upon their very bodies. The Bionis is home to biological creatures like the Homs, while the Mechonis is the realm of mechanical life forms called Mechon. And all of the game's areas take place on or sometimes inside these slumbering titans. Xenoblade Chronicles tells the story of Shulk, a young mechanic who becomes the master of the Monado, a mysterious sword that grants its wielder visions of the future. But the game opens with a dramatic prologue set 1 year before the start of the story, which puts you in control of Dunban, the hero of Colony 9 and the current wielder of the Monado, as he and his allies fight off an invasion of the Mechon. The prologue paints a brilliant picture, showing you the desperate conflict with the Mechon and the critical role the Monado plays in the survival of the Homs. But the best thing about the prologue is what it does for the early chapters of the game. Xenoblade is an epic tale with massive stakes, cosmic drama, and world-shattering revelations. But what really makes the story work is the simple groundwork at its core, the intimate bond you form with the characters. Having foreshadowed the conflict at the heart of the story, the game is able to slow down and let you get to know Shulk, Rain, Fiora, and Dunban in their natural environment. You get a sense for who these characters are and the strength of the bonds between them, building that vital emotional connection between player and protagonist, a connection that pays off like crazy a little bit later when the Mechon attack Colony 9. Because you care about Shulk and his friends, the pain and suffering the Mechon cause becomes yours. The Mechon attack was a massive punch in the gut the first time I played the game, and even on my second look, it still hurts. It's a powerful sequence and a great way to launch the story with an emotional hypercharge. A common criticism of the game is that its characters are boring and forgettable. While I don't think that's true at all, there's definitely a lot of missed potential when it comes to the heroes. And a lot of it has to do with how the characters are fleshed out. Shulk is supposedly a gifted mechanic, but despite endless opportunities for Shulk's passion for tinkering with machines to come up in meaningful ways throughout the story, it's hardly ever mentioned after the first chapter. Compare this with Rex from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, who bleeds the Salvager's code. Another weak spot the game's critics like to point out is that the heroes have no character arcs, but this is a misconception. Xenoblade's characters don't change, but they do grow. They all have stuff they're dealing with, but this is more a story about steadfast characters whose convictions are constantly tested. Even though Shulk remains fundamentally the same nice-to-a-fault guy from start to finish, he struggles a lot with doubt along the way. Cursed with the gift of seeing the future, Shulk must learn to bear the heavy burden that comes from knowing that your fate is already written. He has some massive decisions to make throughout the course of the story, and honestly, seeing his convictions come into full brutal force at the end of the game is a moment that stays with you. While the heroes don't change a whole lot over the course of the game, there is another area that sees a lot of development. The relationships between the heroes, the building trust and support between Melia and Shulk, the slow-cooked romance between Sharla and Rain. These are touching, meaningful relationships that we get to see grow over time. The story is full of flashbacks and character interactions that emphasize and expand the characters' relationships, and relationships are also supported by one of the game's key features, heart-to-heart conversations. These are optional one-to-one scenes that explore the characters and deepens the bond between them. Heart-to-hearts are fun, and they're a great motivation for raising the affinity ranks between your characters. I just wish the game wasn't so stingy with them. Also, for a game that focuses on an epic journey through a fantastic world filled with amazing sights and remarkable discoveries, I would have liked to see a lot more reactions from the cast to the things they see and experience along the way. Xenoblade's characters may not be the most complex or intriguing, but they're heartfelt and genuine, and a great company to keep. My favorite of the bunch is actually Sharla. She's kind of sidelined for a lot of the story, and in combat, she's pretty much a joke, but she's so compelling as a relatable character. She's sometimes strong and sometimes vulnerable, and incredibly real. There's a lot of parallels between her story and Shulk's, and I honestly think she could have easily been the hero of the game if the story had centered on Colony 6 instead of the Monado. Still, I would argue that Xenoblade's strongest characters are not its heroes. Rather, the true strength of Xenoblade's story lies in the opposite end. The best villains in fiction have motivations we can understand, perhaps even agree with, and they present a counter-argument that stands in opposition to the heroes. There's always two sides to every coin, and the question of who's right and who's wrong comes down to the hero having to show the villain through words, through actions, and ultimately through the sword, that there is another way. Xenoblade's major villains present exactly those strong convictions and compelling arguments, and they serve as perfect mirrors for Shulk, a dark reflection of the hero's worst flaws. Something brilliant about Xenoblade's story is that it isn't just told through dialogue and endless cutscenes. It's built right into the gameplay itself. The story of Xenoblade Chronicles revolves around the mysterious sword, the Monado, which has the power to grant its wielder visions of the future. And with the Monado in his hands, Shulk really can change the future. In battle, the Monado will warn of certain powerful attacks the enemy is about to unleash, and you then have a precious few seconds to find a way to change your destiny. It's clever, fun, and a perfect fit for Xenoblade's story. In fact, Xenoblade Chronicles shows an impressive level of commitment to its central plot points. A big deal is made of the fact that only the Monado can hurt the Mechon. A less inspired game would have conveyed this through elaborate cutscenes, but Xenoblade does you one better. By forcing you to fight the Mechon without the Monado, you get a great feel for just how outmatched the Homs are, and how hopeless the fight would be without the Monado. And because of that build-up, the feeling when Shulk finally gets his hands on the sword is incredibly satisfying. That said, as cool as this idea is, it can also get pretty annoying. You'll spend a lot of the game fighting different kinds of Mechon, and having to start every single fight by activating Monado Enchant before the other characters can even do damage can be a real chore sometimes. And as committed as the game is to its plot points, there isn't a whole lot of commitment to its world building. Outside of a few special locations and situations, Xenoblade doesn't do much to really drive home the fact that you're traveling across the backs of two titanic life forms. There's so much more that could have been done with this idea, but Xenoblade barely scratches the surface. And aside from the occasional breathtaking glimpse of a colossal shape among the distant clouds, this story could have honestly been told anywhere. And that's just a huge missed opportunity. Xenoblade Chronicles is far from a perfect game. For every brilliant move the game makes, there's a part that feels like a mistake. The soundtrack is amazing, but when every dramatic scene in the game uses the same song to set the mood, it just loses a lot of its power. The story is epic and engaging, but it also relies way too much on the Monado's visions to tell the heroes where the plot will happen. And for every jaw-dropping revelation and super hype action scene, there's a tired cutscene where the characters stand around a featureless room while someone drops a truckload of information. But here's the thing, these are all minor flaws that can be easily forgiven. And they really don't matter at all when you consider the best thing about Xenoblade's story, the resounding power that lies at the heart of every Xeno title, the thing that will keep me coming back for as long as these games are made. Before I go on, I just want to say if you enjoyed this video, I'd be super grateful if you could hit the like button and leave a quick comment, as it really helps the video reach more people. And if you want to support me, consider subscribing to my channel so I know people want to see more videos like this. There is no creator in the video game industry whose work I admire more than Tetsuya Takahashi, the creative mind behind the Xeno series of JRPGs. Starting with the original Xenogears way back in 1998, Takahashi's games have always been incredibly ambitious. They play out on an absurd scale, are filled with complex characters and philosophical themes, and above all, they have a sense of mystery that far exceeds anything else the genre can offer. Xeno games drop you right into the middle of the story, force you to run to catch up, and immerse you in the deep darkness of the unknown in a way that builds excitement for all the things you don't yet know. A lot of stories out there talk a good game, but when it comes time to actually provide the answers to the mysteries they set up, you realize they never really had the answers in the first place. Takahashi is someone who truly understands how to cultivate mysteries for maximum intrigue, and then actually pull through with the kind of satisfying answers and sick revelations that make the waiting worth it. Xeno games breathe mystery and foreshadowing, and Xenoblade Chronicles is no different. The first few hours of the game are jam-packed with compelling questions that pull you into the experience. Who is Shulk? And where did he come from? What is the Monado, and why doesn't it cut humans? And why are the Mechon so hell-bent on destroying the Homs? Before you're even done with the introduction, you've got more questions rattling around your head than you'll know what to do with. And as you get deeper and deeper into the game, those questions just get more and more captivating. Every plot point is expertly foreshadowed. Characters that become important later on are introduced early. Cutscenes offer cryptic clues through the eyes of the villains and other mysterious characters. Nothing comes out of nowhere, and even the game's most mind-blowing plot twists are built right into the game from the very first moment. When the big reveals come, they feel organic and make perfect sense. But foreshadowing isn't just about setting things up so they make sense when they come into play later. It's also about making promises for the future. Great stories give you just enough information to keep you from starving, but never so much that you stop being hungry. And Xenoblade really does keep you salivating for answers. But the game doesn't just make a lot of big promises, it actually delivers on them too. And some of the payoffs are crazy good. It's a game so dense with secrets, even people who think they've spoiled themselves on the story probably haven't. Xenogames use something I like to call curated confusion to tell their stories. They can feel overwhelming at times, but that's all part of what makes these stories so powerful. It's not about understanding everything that goes on the first time through. You're supposed to feel bewildered and lost, and if you're someone who doesn't like that feeling of vertigo and confusion, then you probably won't like this story. But for those of us who love to get lost in the deep dark heart of a great epic mystery, it's pure magic. Most of my video essays are full of spoilers. This one isn't, and there's a good reason why. That's because Xenoblade Chronicles is a story that must be experienced. And really, what I've been trying to say all this time is this: play this game, live the story, breathe its mystery and wonder and sheer bewildering confusion. Because for its many flaws, Xenoblade Chronicles is a one-of-a-kind, mind-blowing, beautiful mess. A dense, unpredictable ride from one great twist to another. A breathtaking journey from start to finish with a final payoff that's brain-meltingly good. It took me 10 years, 2 attempts, and the shameful application of casual mode to finally make it through Xenoblade Chronicles. And even then, some parts of the game had me tearing my hair out. But all that effort was worth it in the end, because this is a story that will stay with me forever. Xenoblade is a story about fate and those who fight against it. It doesn't preach, but it definitely has a message to deliver. And it's a message as beautiful as it is important today. It's a message of hope and courage, and an argument against nihilism and defeatism. It's a story about how the road to hell is paved with good intentions, how violence creates more violence, and how hatred poisons everything it touches. At the core, it is a very optimistic story, and some people do take issue with Shulk's idealism, but I think that's missing the point. Shulk's ideals may be unrealistic and impractical, but isn't that the very definition of ideal? An ideal is always impractical. True kindness always comes at a cost, and it's the hardest thing in the world to stay true to your ideals when everyone around you seems hell-bent on proving them wrong. Xenoblade is cheesy, but that's a beautiful thing. Sarcasm, defeatism, and nihilism. These things are easy, but it takes real courage to spread a message of hope in a cynical world. In the end, Xenoblade Chronicles is a game about teenagers with big plastic swords fighting giant robots made of gold, and these are just my personal opinions. Whether you agree or disagree, I'd love to hear about your experiences with Xenoblade Chronicles in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.